Thanks everyone for joining. Like Alice said, my name's Kevin, and I'm calling from sunny Southern California. It's early. My kids will be up within the hour, so hopefully we can get through this uninterrupted. So what I want to talk about today is my journey, my relationship with fonts, and what I can say is that is complicated. That is, it's ever changing. I'll start by talking a little bit about my background, bring up to speed on kind of my roller coaster relationship with fonts, and specifically about font licensing. My background includes roles both on the creative agency side and on the brand side. So on the agency side, as a designer, I loved all typefaces and consumed them with no regard of where they came from or how I was legally allowed to use them. As a production artist, I had to work with whatever came my way. My job was really to work within the confines of the decisions made by other designers. I started to see that not all fonts are created equal. There's a big difference between a beautifully built pro font versus some freeware that you can find in random corners of the internet. As a creative director, I built an awareness that we were making decisions that could have, financial and potentially legal repercussions on our clients. It was no longer the Wild West that it had been when I was a new designer. As a production manager, manager of a print production team at an entertainment ad agency, I learned for the first time what an end user license agreement was and how essential and potentially expensive the lack of proper font licensing is, and the dangers of not paying attention. On the client side or brand side, as the first print producer at Netflix, I was now on the receiving end of so much beautiful art agencies all over the world. At that point, I was very dependent on my agency partners to make sure they were securing proper licenses for the work they were producing. Now, as the manager of our retouching and finishing team, all art comes across our desk, and the need to just be hyper vigilant about accurate licensing for all use cases is really a major focus of the work that we do. So as you can see, there's been quite an evolution of the way in which I interact with and the way that I think about font licensing. So I want to take you through a typical campaign life cycle, so that I can point out the way that I think about my role and how we can manage the fonts we use. Because you've seen the roles that I've had, this is probably a good time to say I'm not a lawyer. We'll be talking about my experience with font licensing, and this should not be taken as legal advice in any way. Please consult your legal department. So you start with a thing, and this thing needs a campaign. It can be a soda or hair gel or a car. In my world, this thing is a show or a film, or specifically, we can talk about the title treatment of a show. So you've got your brand manager, content marketing manager. They send a brief to a creative agency. That creative agency, kind of just chews on the information and the visuals and the tone and the goals of that brief. They build out their ideas on how to design, how to solve this particular design problem. The best of those ideas is carried down from the mountaintop and presented back to the marketing team. You go rounds and rounds, back and forth, and hone in to build, what I would call a short list. And then you kind of swirl around in this area a little bit. At this point, the marketing team will share out to a number of stakeholders. That can include showrunners or talent who may or may not have approval rights over their likeness or the way that the art looks and feels. And also other members of kind of the marketing and content leadership team will weigh in at this point. So once everyone arrives on the same page, they agree on the way forward. we're locked. We can say that we now have art lock. And once we're locked on art, all the mechanisms of the production pipeline, really kick in to turn this little idea from a slide and a presentation deck into a living, breathing promotional campaign. And production is the last set of eyes on any asset before it goes live and out into the world. So, paying attention is very important. So let's bring this process into kind of a linear timeline. Here's the same thing on a straight line, chronological order. The team that I work with is responsible for all artwork, preparation, retouching, color correction, and I would say most importantly, the licensing component. So at what point in this process do you think the print team gets invited to the life cycle? Yeah, it's right there at Art Lock. Get an email, adding print team, take it away. And where do you think we want to be invited in? Yeah, way back at the beginning, at the top of the mountain during the design brief is where we want to kind of start this journey along with the rest of the team. I constantly feel like this guy. I feel like the salmon, always trying to get further upstream. And the further up there I can get, the more I'll be able to have an effect on the downstream work that everyone on the team is doing. But we'll talk about that more in a bit. Since the first few steps of this life cycle happen within the creative agency, I'll talk about my experience over there first. So on the agency side, we'd receive the brief, pull out our bag of tricks, and unfortunately, with many art directors, their bag of tricks includes a thumb drive with fonts from previous shops. These are unlicensable, untraceable font files from long ago, and they've just been collected over the years. And while we started to see some foundries start to go after big movie studios and design shops for non-licensed font usage, as these lawsuits started coming in, we realized it's our responsibility to protect ourselves, to protect our movie studio clients. So very quickly we had to learn how to read EULA, had to learn the difference in usage rights between broadcast versus digital versus print. I had to learn about time limits and impression limits, desktop licenses versus embedded web fonts, etc. So one example, we had one project, one job, an art director on our team had chosen their typeface from some random free font site. The filmmaker loved the design, and we were just really not excited about the idea of going back to them with another design and explaining that we had chosen a font that was unusable. So I dug in to see if I could track down a EULA, and no luck. There was some language about being free for all uses, personal and commercial, but that just wasn't going to fly with our legal team. So I finally came across a link that claimed to go to the font designer's portfolio site. It linked out to a Facebook page. So I did what any good production manager would do. I logged into Facebook and I sent the designer a note on Facebook Messenger. So this is me in this scenario. I'm K-Dog. So I said, hey, cool font. Mind if I use it for a project that I'm working on? And later in the day, they actually responded. They were like, yeah, totally. I'm glad you like it. So I jumped in and I said, oh yeah, awesome. Are you down with granting rights for all media worldwide in perpetuity? And they said, yeah, sure. So screenshot, saved it, sent it to the lawyers, moved on to the next project. This is not how this is supposed to work. And to be clear, this was before my current job at Netflix. It's an example of the way that we handled that particular situation. I have a much deeper understanding now of how font licensing works, and I would not recommend anyone handle an issue in this way. So we decided it's time to clean this up. Let's turn this chaos into something that resembles order. We purged every machine, all the font files, purchased a clean font library. I think we spent $40,000 on this new library, managed it through Extensys Suitcase, and we just locked it down. At that point, it was me and my boss at the time were the only ones with admin access. If necessary, we could add a license in one at a time, only after reviewing the EULA. And I had some angry art directors at my desk. You're limiting my creativity. Who are you to say what fonts we can and cannot use? It was such a bummer. I love this stuff, and I love type, and I don't want to tell someone that they're not allowed to use something. So we got to a point, and the conversations really turned into, I had to say, look, this is not fine art we're working on. This is commercial art. We have a responsibility to our employer and to our clients, and to be acting in a responsible way on their behalf. And I approached these conversations really with the idea of balancing creative freedom with mitigating risk. And after many heartfelt conversations and respect and a lot of listening, we got to a place where there was less sadness and concern with having a limited pool of fonts. So the team understood how important it was to work within these parameters. We even had one art director really start to kind of champion our. She was so proud, in critiques. She would put up her work on the wall and let us know, be like, look, I personally reviewed the EULA, and this is definitely a font that we could use if this art makes it through, if it's chosen. So it was so nice to see that, to see this team kind of taking these changes seriously, and for them to actually care about licensing. It was nice to see the effort. So shortly after completing this exercise of purging all the font libraries at my creative agency job, I landed a job offer at Netflix. So I was out of there. I was on to the next adventure. But I still get to work with those guys every day. But now I'm their client, and they work on a ton of projects that we send their way. So now we come to the part of the life cycle that we're in now, from art lock forward. And on the creative marketing production team at Netflix, we're the recipient of all campaign art. And we get files from every shop in town. We work with some of the largest ad agencies in the world. We also get to work with individual freelancers and small shops, I would say with maybe less experience or less access to resources than the larger shops have. When I joined, there was a wide range of how files came in. This also meant that tracing the source of the fonts being used for different art was just a total nightmare. And out of necessity, we've really become good at this, really become good at keeping track of all these things. We follow up with agencies, we pore over the EULAs, we chase down type designers for proper usage rights. The problem here is that it's so time consuming. It's just not scalable, at the volume that we're working. So we needed a solution, and that it just meant working smarter. So we started looking, and then I kind of felt like this guy, just looking around for something to catch my eye. For us, the solution, it really started to take shape when we signed the Mosaic deal with Monotype. Now, it's not a paid endorsement. This is simply an honest account of my experience. Mosaics, at least it's the first step to help solve the way my team works within our industry. We have access to Mosaic. We also have Adobe fonts for stock images. We have deals with a couple of stock sites. So now we have the tool. We have to hike it back up to the top of the mountain. And remember this guy? We need to swim all the way upstream and bring everybody along on the journey with us. The work's, it's not done yet, but at least we have the tools. We have the roadmap and the way forward. So now we get to do the work. Next is education. We focus on awareness. We focus on adoption. So we'll talk with our production team and our creative agency partners, and then we'll bring it back to our creative marketing teams. So we've already started with our immediate team. Anyone involved in print or digital art production is already on board. They know the tools and they will talk to anyone about it. Anyone who's willing to listen. Good energy and adoption and understanding within our core team. So, and while we're all remote, working from home, I've been so happy to see these efforts really only increase. Someone from our team will get tagged to an email thread so we can check on a license or help find a suitable alternate from our font library. These conversations are very slowly starting to get easier because we're starting to build an awareness around it, and we're being very consistent. Next is an agency roadshow. I'll be at a digital roadshow. It'll be a Zoom roadshow, and in doing that, we'll be able to present the benefits of kind of working within this vetted and pre-cleared library of fonts. We'll also set the expectation that this should be their first stop on every campaign. And really it is what needs to happen when working on a Netflix job. If they chose to go outside Mosaic, our hope is that they'll flag it early so we can vet any third-party font that they're looking at potentially using. Right now, it's safe to say across all of our agencies, plus our in-house creative teams, we have almost 1,500 users working with our font library. So it's a great start, and we're looking for that only to increase. Finally, we're going to bring the conversation back to our creative marketing team. We'll let them know the resources and workflows that we put in place. And most importantly, we'll let them know all their agencies are already up to speed. They're on board with exactly what we're asking for. So now anytime an agency is talking with someone at Netflix, they'll be hearing a fully aligned and very consistent message. And that's the place that we want to be. Instead of being in this kind of reactive place and sorting through and processing all the files delivered to us, we'll be in a more proactive place, and that's the way forward. We'll take time to share our resources, share our expectations with each of our creative partners, and by sharing our clean library now with the people who will be creating the art for our campaigns, when we receive final locked art months or even a year from now, it assures, or at least for the most part, it assures we should have no issue securing licenses for the fonts that we choose. And it makes for this like beautiful loop of sharing information and resources out and then getting back clean, usable, creative campaigns. And I gotta say, that's a beautiful thing. So in conclusion, make friends. Get to know your partners at every stage in the campaign and talk with them early and talk with them often. I'd also say don't be afraid to run things past your legal department. You know, they're there to help you navigate these murky waters. You know, it's also important. I would say it's important to pay for the use of the fonts that we use. They're designed and put out in the world for commercial use, and this is an intellectual property that belongs to someone, and they deserve to be compensated for the work that they created. It's also important to make sure someone on your team is paying attention, and paying attention in order to keep your company or your clients safe. So an informed captain, you know, that's close to the work can really help head off any potential issues as they come up. And lastly, if you're trying to get permission to use somebody's font, try to avoid doing that via Facebook Messenger. The lawyers, they really don't like that very much. So thank you for taking the time to listen to my story.
Great. Thank you so much, Kevin. That was a great presentation. And thank you again for joining us so early in your morning. So we have about 5 minutes now. So I'd love it if we could get to some questions. For anyone who wants to ask a question, feel free to do so via the chat pane. So we've got one that's coming for you so far, which is, are you looking more at the design or style of a font? I think it's referring to when you do your reviews, or the glyph set or open type features or ligatures, and how important is the hinting via broadcast?
It really comes down to the end user license agreement of what we're allowed to do. Yeah, so I wish I understood the question better. Yeah, it really just comes down to what works for the title and for the art. And if for some reason, you know, we can't secure rights for it, we'll find an alternate that really works. It's got the same look and feel and flavor, and works across all the different medium.
Great. Yeah, so we asked for a little more clarity on that question, but in the meantime, I'll jump into another one, which is, you talked a lot about education and, you know, the agency roadshow and all these elements that are gonna help you further swim upstream, and I'm curious how that is playing out in today's world where you're all virtual, and how you're overcoming challenges or continuing on with that work to educate and be involved in the conversation sooner.
Yeah, it's a good question, and you know, we're in the middle of it right now. You know, 2 years ago, as we shifted process back then, you know, we were able to kind of physically go around to all the different shops, and it's so fun experiencing different agencies and how they work and how the shop is set up. So we really kind of did our roadshow that way. Now it's obviously it's different. You know, we have existing, you know, and kind of daily, weekly conversational relationships with a lot of these shops already. So luckily we're not really meeting any of them for the first time, but just kind of reconnecting, and it'll be like this. You know, I think we've all gotten used to learning how to interact through a screen with everybody, and we can have the good kind of meet and greet. Maybe they'll take their machine around and give us a little tour if they're working, but most people are working remotely, so it's just conveying information and landing on the same page. And more than anything, it's just opening up that channel of communication. You know, anytime I'm able to connect with, you know, a VP of production or an agency owner, we make sure to leave there with the door open. You know, they don't always get the technical and you know, specifics of information from their creative marketing partner. You know, they're talking big ideas and strategy, and that's a really good place for that. If you have technical issues, here's my email, here's my phone number, you know, talk with us. And I've found that really forging those bonds early have a lasting effect. You know, there'll be sometimes I haven't heard from somebody at an agency in a year, and they're like, hey Kev, we saw this update on the brand site, I just wanted to ask about it. Or our key art templates have a different font. You know, you guys switched over, you have now, you know, Netflix Sans, can we get that font? So it's so important to have those connections and really just demystify who's on the receiving end of files, and to open up that dialogue. So I'm excited to get back to that and either reconnect with shops we haven't talked to in a while, and then, you know, kind of meet some of the newer shops that we're working with.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I've always said that if you can meet someone in person, even just once, it makes such a difference in terms of that virtual connection that you can have. Okay, so a couple more questions before we have to wrap up. Does Netflix secure font rights on behalf of the production company or for Netflix as a legal entity? So who actually has the rights to the fonts?
That's a good question. You know, I mean, I can speak specifically, you know, with our deal with Mosaic, you know, that covers product usage, which is anything you actually see on service, you know, when you're navigating Netflix. It works for marketing usage, and also for production. So, you know, we were securing a license just the other day for a sign that shows up in the background of a show, and you know, we made sure it was within our deal, and those are all covered. So, you know, that is definitely, you know, the Netflix agreement with Mosaic or with Monotype, and the production companies, you know, that's I let the lawyers deal with that. You know, there are contracts between the production companies and Netflix. So where it actually lies, I don't know. Luckily, there's much smarter people on the team that get to talk about all that stuff.
So we're just about up on time. We've got a few other questions that maybe you can respond to afterwards in the chat, but just one last kind of fun one for you to leave us with, which is working for Netflix. What's your favorite binge-worthy watch? Any recommendations?
Yeah, I mean, it's
in your presentation, right?
Guilty pleasure, right? I mean, you can see behind me, I'm a big fan of Abstract, you know, season 1 and 2. But right now, my wife and I are watching Instant Hotel. It's just, you know, just a fun watch. You know, people doing almost like Airbnbs in Australia, and they compete against each other. You know, fun stuff. Good thing to you know, eat a bowl of ice cream and hang out and watch.